And here this morning, you have your Bibles, go to Nehemiah. That is the Old Testament, if you need to know. Nehemiah chapter 1. Woo-wee. Glad I'm not a children's worker. There is as many of them leaving as there are of y'all in here this morning. Well, praise the Lord for that. My goodness. I would say leave me a few, but I don't know that I want them. You know, it's rare that I preach series, but it seems like that if it's going to happen, it always happens around January. And I was preparing this, and as I was preparing it, sometimes I just know it's like this is not going to be 1 week. And so right now I know that I'm at least going to be 2 weeks, maybe 3 in the book of Nehemiah. I love the book of Nehemiah. I relate to it. He is the restorer. He is the rebuilder of walls. He is the unlikely that becomes likely. And this week what we're talking about is the restorers. And the call is to come alive, like we've talked about, come alive in 25, but to come alive and serve the cause. And we're going to talk about what that cause is this morning as well. The book of Nehemiah, we know it was likely written between 445 and 420 BC. That's over 400 years before Christ. Nehemiah was in exile in Babylon along with many other Israelites after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC. And Nehemiah was born into exile, and his parents were captured and taken captive by the Babylonians. So it's interesting, he is about to be the biggest advocate for the Jews and for Israel, and he was born in captivity. He's never known what it's like to be free. He's never known what it's like to not live in the enemy's kingdom. He becomes cupbearer to the king of Persia, a dangerous role that involved tasting the king's food and drink before serving it to him. And you would think that that's not an important role. But you know what? If Brett was my cupbearer and he was testing my food, I would like Brett a lot because I wouldn't want him to go, "Oh, it's good. Here you go." And then I drink it and die, you know. And so he is important to the king of Persia. He's become the cupbearer. Nehemiah then returns to Jerusalem to help rebuild the city's walls after learning that they were in ruins. And the book of Nehemiah in the Hebrew Bible is a memoir written by Nehemiah about his experience. Now, he mentions that he is in the citadel of Susa. And when you look at that, you're like, I don't even know what that means. Dr. Seuss, Susa. I don't know. It always reminds me of the same thing. And a citadel is like, it means really the most fortified area of a town. And now, just kind of showing you where this is. And so, the place, according to Nehemiah, is in Shushan, also known as Susa. It's one of the capitals of the Persian Empire, the one in which the book of Esther is set. So if you read the book of Esther. And the city was around 150 miles north of the Persian Gulf in what is today Iran. So you can kind of see how this all lays out. This is where Nehemiah is, and this is where he travels to Judea to rebuild the walls of the city there. And so he makes this ultimate journey. Now, if you have your Bibles, like I said, Nehemiah chapter 1, we're going to start there. But I wanted to give you a little of the backstory because sometimes it's hard to even get past the first little bit of it. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year while I was in the what? The citadel of Susa. In other words, I was in the innermost fortified city of the kingdom of Susa. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. And when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. Highlight that in your Bible. If you have a highlighter, if you have a pen, if you have an app, mark that. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. I think if you're going to pray to the Lord and ask for something and you're praying for your people, this is a great way to start. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer and your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites have. What we talk about, he's confessing, he's praising. All of these things included in his prayer, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We've not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are in the furthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place that I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this, your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And then that's where it says, I was cupbearer to the king. So he's praying for favor before the king. And he's praying, it's interesting because he prays for repentance of the people. And he says, hey, we've messed up. And you said, Lord, that if we went against you, that you were going to scatter us. But if we repented and came back, you would gather us even from the furthest nations. See, nothing's changed about this. We'd like to say, oh, this is just Old Testament. God's not concerned with us being obedient to him. We've got grace a mile long, and I hope we do. But there's not an excuse for us to continue sinning, as Paul said. And he says, forgive us, Lord. He starts with that. Sometimes I think your prayers, it just needs to start with, forgive me, Lord. So someone now has came to the citadel of Susa where Nehemiah was. And so Nehemiah questions him, and he told him about the condition of the people in Judah. And this information, it breaks Nehemiah's heart. And this is what I know. We need informants. We need people who are actively aware of the conditions around them and bring the people who have the resources to respond. That's not right. I don't know every problem in Weaver. I had a few that come before us this week, and we were able to help with those needs. But I don't know what's going on. I don't know the heartbeat of the school all the time because I'm not there all the time. But you do. You may say, hey, we've got this great need over here. We've got this person in need. And you know what? This is an informant that comes in and says, here's the information. And then the church says, well, we have the resources to meet that need. And what's bad is like sometimes it's brought to us, and we actually have the resources to meet the need. But we just walk away from it and expect somebody else to do it. When you got the resources to meet the need, why don't you just go ahead and meet the need? Like if someone comes begging for you and they say, hey, can you give me $5? Man, I'm down on my luck. And you go, I'll pray for you. Is that really meeting a need for them? See, we need to carry the people to where the resources are. So then I want to flip over to Nehemiah chapter 2. I'm going to show you some of this, and then we're going to get into it. All right, Nehemiah chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and I gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. And he said, I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and the gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, I love this. What is it you want? The enemy king looks on the servant of the king and he says, why are you sad? This could have meant death for Nehemiah. He said, why are you sad? And he tells him. And then the king's like, the king is really responsible for what's happened to the people. It's his kingdom that has torn down the walls. It's his kingdom that has burned the gates. And he says, you know what? This is only the favor of God that can fall on somebody. Because the king says, what is it? What is it you want? He said, then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king, if it pleases the king and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. Set me free. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, he asked me this, how long will your journey take and when will you get back? I love how much the king loves Nehemiah. He says, what do you want? And then he says, hey, you want to go? Well, how long is your journey going to take and when will you get back? It's almost like a relative is leaving because he says, when are you going to come back? And it pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of God was on me, the king granted my request. So I went to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, and I gave them the king's letters. And the king had also sent an army of officers and cavalry with me. And then look, when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. We'll get to them at a later time. But this is what I know. You have to get brokenhearted for a situation. Nehemiah could not control his emotion over his concern for his people. And Nehemiah's brokenness drove a response from others. Because he couldn't control his emotions, it caught the attention of the king. Nehemiah didn't come up. He couldn't come up and speak before he was spoken to. He couldn't come up and say, hey, I'm so heartbroken for my people. If the king didn't ask him, then it wasn't his right to know. And normally that would mean that Nehemiah would have been killed. But instead of being killed, it actually drove the king to respond to Nehemiah's need. Think about it this way. Have you ever sat and listened to a missionary come and speak to the church before? Like I've listened to all kinds, from Mexico to Africa, all kinds, South America. And as they're telling you of the foreign land they are in, and as they show you pictures of the people they are reaching, your heart begins to melt, and you feel led to support the missionaries' ministry. See, this is how I know brokenness drives response. I thought I was going to be a missionary. I did. I thought I would go to Africa. I was like, Lord, send me. Lord, send me. Lord, please send me, God. And he says, stay. And I said, Lord, send me. I'm willing to go anywhere. And he said, but are you willing to stay here? Sometimes the calling to stay is harder than the calling to go. And but brokenness drove my response so many times, because I would listen to those stories and I would say, oh man, I want to be there. I want to be there living on the cusp of the presence of God moving. And then when I thought about, if I went to Africa, I thought, man, I'm pretty scared of snakes. I think there's a few snakes over there. When I was leading Elevation Ministries, we had 5 prayer principles, and I encouraged our team. I said, pray these things daily. But one of those prayer principles was, God, break our hearts for what breaks yours. Sometimes we don't even know the things to pray for. So what I wanted our team to do is to be led in the direction of the Lord's heart. Like they said, we want to reach Weaver. Well, how do you want to reach Weaver? What needs to be reached? We just want to get people in church? Do we just want to give money to this organization or give money to these people? Do we want to feed the needy? Do we want to clothe those who don't have clothing? What do we want to do? Well, how about this? We just pray, hey, God, show us what we need to be praying for. Because we don't even know the things to pray for. So we need to pray for the Lord's heart and guidance. And this is what I noticed with Nehemiah. And this is what I've noticed with the teams that I've led. You'll get bold when you're brokenhearted. Because the brokenhearted always do bold things. I mean, I got several guys in law enforcement, but sometimes the craziest things you'll see will be in response to domestic conflict. They're so engaged in relationship with somebody. When something goes awry or something happens, that's when the craziness happens. That's when somebody goes out and kills somebody. That's when somebody goes out and does something. That's when the guy climbs the water tower and paints his name on the side of it. All of these things are bold moves that are driven by brokenheartedness, by matters of the heart. And Nehemiah is moved in response to brokenness. And it's his brokenness that ignites his passion to do what seemingly had been impossible before. His brokenness led him to make a bold request for the king, one that asked the kingdom that tore down the walls of Judah to finance the rebuilding of them. And then the king says yes, and the king just wants to know, when are you going to be back, Nehemiah? But because of his love for Nehemiah, he gives him whatever he needs. That shows the favor of God. That just shows that the financing will not be a problem when it's the Lord's project. I've sat in so many meetings, not here, just throughout the years. I've sat in meetings where everybody was so worried about the finances for what we were going to do this, or how we were going to do this, or how we would ever be able to do that. And I thought, well, if it's the Lord's project, And I've heard this, and it's kind of cliche, but it's like, if it's the Lord's will, it's the Lord's bill. And I've seen him do it over and over again. And the times that I've seen the stream run dry is when the people got selfish. And they got worried about, would the Lord do it again? Oh, we got to hold this back. What if this happens? What if this happens? Just meet the need. Just be bold. He'll fill your other hand if this one goes empty. Nehemiah is moved to respond and rebuild, but it was God who was moving him, and his brokenness led to boldness. Because Nehemiah goes, well, the king goes, well, what do you need? And he says, well, if you're asking, I need timber. I need soldiers to carry me back. I need letters from you with the king's seal on them. And these are big requests. This is the enemy king. And these are big requests. And he's saying, these are the things that I need in order for it to happen. The king says, sure, no problem. Okay. And sometimes we don't get because we don't ask. Are we really that concerned that God is not going to provide for the vision? If the vision is to go and gather his people so they won't go to hell, are we so concerned that he's not going to provide that need for us? The problem is when it becomes our need, what we want and not what he wants. But when you get brokenhearted about what he wants, he provides the way for you to do what he needs you to do. We'll get there. Let's look a little further. Nehemiah chapter 2. I went to Jerusalem. So Nehemiah's left the citadel of Susa. He said, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. And then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool. There was not enough room for my mount to get through. In other words, what he was riding on, there wasn't any room for him to get through. He said, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Hadn't said anything to them. And he says, then I said to them, you see, he finally gathers them together. He says, you see, the trouble we are in Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And then they replied, let us start building. So they began this good work. This seems, there's so much of this that's happening on the other side of these few scripture that it's hard for us to fathom when we're just reading through, because he's like, well, I got there, it was broken down, I looked around, I walked around, I surveyed the damage, you know what, and then I went to these people, and we don't want to mention that these people have been living without walls for 150 years. I don't want to say that, but you know what, I go in there and I tell them, hey, the gracious hand of God's on me, he sent me with all of the supplies, he sent me with all the people, and they say, okay, that's great, let's start building. That doesn't just happen. I feel like we see the character shift in Nehemiah. It's kind of like we see the same thing in the story of Gideon from Judges chapter 6. When you first see Gideon, he's hiding in the winepress threshing wheat. And he's hiding from the Midianites, thinking he is the smallest of the small of all the clans and families. But in the end of the story, he's led a few people to destroy thousands upon thousands of the Midianites, tracked down 2 kings and killed them. And as these kings are about to die, they tell the men that they had previously killed were like Gideon. They were like the sons of a king. I thought Gideon was the smallest of the small. And then when you look back at that story, he says, no, these other kings look at Gideon and they say, oh, they were like you, Gideon, the sons of kings. See, I see that kind of shift in Nehemiah, because at first he's this humble servant to the king that we see him as the cupbearer. But then he arrives on the scene and he's bold. He's surveying the conditions of the wall, and he's leading people. Do you not remember just a chapter ago, he's before the king and he's like, oh, I don't want to offend you, I've never been sad before, my friends. But then he gets on the scene of Jerusalem, he's like, well, let's go see what's going on. And he starts circling the walls, and he's entering through places that he shouldn't even be able to get into. Do you understand? There's no structure here when you can go in the walls and out of the walls, and you can go through where gates are supposed to be. See, there's none of that there. He says, look, he goes before the group of people and he gives them this speech after he returns from surveying the condition of the walls. That's what I'm talking about, this character shift. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing because yet I had not said anything to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. And then I said to them, you see the trouble that we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. And I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start building. So they began this good work. Let me say something about these people. These people had a losing mentality when Nehemiah arrived. They've not rebuilt the walls on their own, and they've settled for living in temporary housing without the benefits that the walls bring a city. See, you can't have an economy inside of a city that doesn't have walls. Why? Because other people will come in and take it. You can't have personal housing because people will come in there and tear it down. And they've settled for living in tents when God wanted them to live in houses. They've settled not to have when God wanted them to have. And see, the walls have been down for over 150 years. Then Nehemiah comes in and wakens the people to build the walls. And later we'll see how they accomplish it within 52 days. And it would have been done sooner, but half the time they had to stack bricks with one hand and hold a sword with another. And it takes a special person to lead people to victory who are used to losing. I know this morning, I just know who's here, but we have several coaches. How difficult is it to win when your team forgets how? When your team starts believing all they can do is lose. When they always think everybody's better than them. How hard is it? It takes a special coach to turn that team around. You have to change mentality. Superior, talented teams will lose to lesser talent when they begin thinking that they can't win. And Nehemiah just comes in and he says, hey, I want to tell you about the gracious hand of the Lord. I want to tell you how it led me to the king. Hey, I'm here with all of the supplies that the king has brought me. Hey, this outside, these guys out here, this is the king's army that he's put with me. This is the assurance that what I'm telling you is true. And they go, hey, let's start building. How does it flip that soon? Because you're out there living in a tent. You're out there living in something that's temporary. And Nehemiah must have had a fire in his eyes that convinced the people that, you know what? If God is for us, who can be against us? Because you won't passionately pursue things that don't tug at your heart. More than likely, at one time, at least I would hope so, that your mate caused you to passionately pursue things. And you forsake everything else so that you could be with them. And you know what? You want them because why? They become your sole focus. This is what I know. We would be more about evangelism if we truly believed that people were dying and going to hell. If we understood the realities of hell, there is no way that we could stay silent when we knew someone was destined for there. We would cry and plead for their salvation, and we would hurt for them to experience salvation through one alone, Jesus Christ. That's what this church has to awaken this way. We have to understand the realities of hell. And if there are people going there, and just because you hear it preached at every funeral, everybody's not going to heaven. Some people aren't. I get asked to do funerals from time to time of people that I know that probably aren't. There's no evidence in their life. And I'm not going to get up there and be like, well, they're in the gates of heaven today. I can't preach somebody into heaven. I love it when I can get up there and someone's lifestyle showed that's where they're at. I don't get up there and say, oh, well, that person's in hell today. I don't say that. But I won't get up there and say they're in heaven either. And if we want to have a world impact, if we want to have community impact, we'll have to quit looking at this place that we're in here like a theater where you come to see a show and start using it as a gathering place for the warriors to assemble and strategize. This isn't just a place where this is the big screen, put Matt on the big screen so he can talk to you for a few minutes and then you can go have a good lunch with your family. No, this is a place where we strategize. This is a place where the warriors put boots to the ground. This is a place where we get in here and we train so that, you know what, that when we leave here, we can affect the places that we're going. The church should be a unit of people that stretch out in all areas, that seek out the needs of the community and stand ready to share how Jesus Christ is the only way and answer for sin. I've told this before, but all of you weren't here at that time. All sickness ends in the grave, except one. All sickness ends in the grave except one. That means that if you die of cancer, you're not going to carry it past the grave. You're not going to get to heaven and still have cancer. You're not going to stand before the Lord and still have cancer. If you have heart disease, Alzheimer's, your body may die, but that condition will die when you get to Jesus. When you get before Jesus after death, the only sin that will, or the only sickness that will remain will be sin. That's the thing that you can carry from this life over to the next. And we're going to have to stand before Him one day. And what we're going to be able to do is stand before Him, and we're either going to have our sin and our own sickness that we brought from here, or we're going to stand before God through the lens of Jesus. And when He looks at us, He's going to say, nope, that one's covered. That one's good. That one's good. And we don't carry that sickness over into that next lifestyle. When you get before Jesus after death, your sin will still be with you if you're not covered by Him. But the thing is, you have the answer for it. And you won't have to say anything else because you'll be covered if you're saved. It won't be your righteousness, but it'll be because of His. Well, how will we do this? How will we be restorers of broken cities? How will we bring the greatness of God back into the homes and lives of those around us? It all comes back to chapter 2, verse 18 of Nehemiah. This is the point where the leadership of Judah shifted and began following the guidance of Nehemiah. Okay, so we're on verse 18, sorry. I also told them about what? The gracious hand of my God. The gracious hand of my God. When people see the hand of the Lord is on you, accompanied by the proof. In other words, Nehemiah said, the gracious hand of God was on me, and then the king did this. This is proof that the gracious hand of God is on me. A lot of times people want to say, well, God is with me, but there's no evidence of that. These people saw the evidence that the gracious hand of God was on them. So Nehemiah tells them what the king had said and done. It was proof that the hand of God was in it. And at that moment, what it's going to do, it's going to draw the attention of the crowd. But it's never going to happen unless we get broken over what He's broken for, and then we're willing to pursue it. You know that neighbor that you have that doesn't know the Lord? He's heartbroken over him. You know that coworker that's vile and talks about things that you don't want to hear about? He is heartbroken over them. They're his child. You know that person that you don't understand? Maybe that homeless person that you see time and time again. You know, maybe that person that comes around and you know that they're not living for the Lord. Guess what? God is heartbroken over them. Enough so that at one point in time, He said, you know what? I'm going to send my Son, a very piece of myself in Jesus Christ, to the earth. He's going to be abused. He's going to be made fun of from all on out of the world's history. For some people, He'll be a laughing stock, but I'm going to send Him to pay the price for their sin. And that's how much He's heartbroken for them. And we don't even want to get disturbed from our schedule. But brokenness will lead you to do bold things. You say, well, I'm not heartbroken over people. Why don't you pray to get broken? That's the boldness. When we started out with our ministry in Elevation, it was the outreach ministry to the city of Anniston. I ran it for several years. I knew we wasn't broken for everything that we needed to be broken for. I knew we didn't even really have the capacity to understand what we needed to be broken for, because a lot of the things that were happening, we were on the outside of. We weren't on the inside of. So I said, we got to pray every day that God would break our heart for what's breaking His. Because brokenness will drive you to respond. Brokenness will cause you to do bold things. Brokenness will take you out of your comfort zone. It'll put you in places that you never thought you would go, to do things you'd never thought you would do. This church has got to be broken for this community and these people that we're trying to reach. And if we're not, we might as well all pack it up and just go to lunch, because we're done. We're done. If we're not about bringing people to Christ, growing the kingdom, not the campus, if we're not about that, then we ought to just pack it up and go home. If y'all want to come and just hear a great speaker, next week I'll let Brett have it, and he can go on, and I'm just going to go on to the house, because I'm not here just to preach and just to be seen on the stage. I want to do the other things. I want to go into the other places. But you know what? We got to be broken before we're ever going to go. I have seen great things at this church at times. We see them quite often, but I've told this story many times. But I do remember when we were meeting in the fellowship hall over there temporarily while we were waiting on this to get done. And I do remember walking by after service one morning, and I could see tears on the floor. I could see them on the tile floors. I could see the tears of the people. That's brokenness. That's brokenness. I hope over time, and time will only tell this, I hope that the carpet up here wears out before anything else. I hope that's what we see. I hope that's what drives excitement around here, is to get in the presence of God. Because this morning what we were seeing some people praying for some things and they had some needs, but we were seeing some people just worshiping up here. There's nothing wrong with that. Brokenness will drive you to do bold things. Next week, I'm going to show you how outside opposition begins to arise against Nehemiah. And I'll show you how he dealt with it. But becoming a restorer will be a decision that you make every day to live Jesus out in the areas that God has placed you in. Tomorrow at this time, no one will be here. There won't be anybody in this building. As far as I know, the guys may stop by and clean, or Karen may stop in to pay a bill or something, but nobody will be here. But guess what? All of us that are in here now will be at all our places. I'll be back at my office at Aerospace Coatings. I'll be doing IT work. I'll be working. But you know what I can do? I can carry the boldness of God with me to touch people's lives and to somehow impact them where I'm at. See, the great call of the mission field is to impact where you're at. And all of you have got a mission field wherever you're going to go, because you're going to find yourself tomorrow with people in front of you, and God's going to give you your own audience of people. But if you're not broken for them, what you'll do is you'll let them pass on by you when God's going, I love that heart. I want that heart. I want them to come know me. Worship team, would you come this morning? I don't know if I've done a good job at conveying the message this morning. I really don't. But I pray that you understand this. That if you don't get broken over it, if you don't ask God to break your heart for what breaks His, if you don't begin to see the lost like He sees them, you're never going to be motivated to go and reach them. You're never going to be motivated to love the unlovable. You're never going to be able to be motivated to go and do something that's outside of your comfort, that's outside of your convenience. You're never going to be bold enough to ask God to fulfill impossible prayers. You're never going to be bold enough to ask Him to write checks that you don't have in your account. You're never going to be bold enough to go and request the things that need to be done. Why would God pour money into something that He knows is just going to sit there? But if He knew that we were going to spread out almost like a cancer spreads out in all directions and consumes everything around it, if He knew that we were going to do that as a church, guess what? There wouldn't be anything that could stop us. And I'm praying it don't just happen in here. I'm praying for every church in Weaver right now. And not only that, really every church around, that God would just fill them all. That it would just be the thing coming before Him. Let's get broken, people. We got to look at Nehemiah and look at what he said before the people. He was asking. He was saying, what? How are the people? And when they told him how the people were, their condition broke his heart. Would you just think for a minute outside of these walls and think about the condition of the people? Let's stand together this morning. You know somebody that don't know Him. And you know what's great though? You might know somebody that used to didn't know Him, but they're in here this morning. There's teens that are at your school that don't know the Lord. They don't know the joys of Deeper Weekend. They don't know the joys of youth pastors who will love them. They don't know the joys of coming to church and understanding the value of their life that Jesus has placed on it. And if they have a pulse, they have a purpose. There's people everywhere, in every direction. But when are we finally going to get broken for what Jesus is broken for. I pray we would do that this morning.